Hello and welcome to the Heat Check Podcast, Miami Herald's Miami Heat Podcast. I'm David Wilson, and I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chiang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, are you a little annoyed that UD kind of upstaged you by kind of monopolizing 3:05 day? I know you were planning to make a big announcement.
Yeah, he also didn't have to do it at 3:05 p.m. I mean, that's
Yeah, he really he kind of
come
like,
on.
I know whenever you were planning to retire, you were planning on making all your big announcements at that exact moment.
No, it wasn't UD's decision. I'll say that, and we'll get to that.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna talk
cover
about
in
UD
a
at
little
the end
bit,
of this episode.
but that was perfect for that to come out on March 5th at 3:05 p.m. and obviously very intentional for that to come out at that.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk to UD at the end. As Anthony acknowledged on Twitter, he did not announce his retirement at this point, but it kind of like I'd say he made it official, sort of, at that moment. But yeah, we're gonna talk about that a little bit at the end. The Heat's plans to honor him at the end of this season. And you talked to him for a story that went up at 3. What did you put that up at 3:06? I guess you gave it a minute.
3:05.
Yeah.
No, I think 3:05 actually.
A story that went up in conjunction with all the Heat's announcements. So we'll get to that at the end. In the meantime, we've got some basketball to talk about. We're recording Tuesday afternoon, so there is, as there often is, a game between now and when you'll be listening to this episode. Not the most convenient timing this time of year, considering how meaningful every game is in the Heat's push to get out of the play-in. As we talk now, they are 2 games back of the Nets and kind of just fighting with the Nets now. The Knicks have gone on a big run and separated themselves. Look like they're going to probably grab the 5 seed pretty safely in that range right now. So I guess let's kind of set the stage for where the Heat is at right now. We're going to talk about a couple different topics, but I know you wanted to start just going big picture. What, there are 18 games left, is that right?
16 games
16
left.
games left.
Tuesday.
As of Tuesday, so it'll be 15 by the time people listen to this. Sorry, Panthers have 18 games left. I'm getting them mixed up. And like I said, he'd have 2 games to make up on the Nets. Let's just start with the basics. What do they need to? We talked last week about what they need to do, like in terms of playing better, all that kind of stuff to kind of make a run here. What do they need to do to get on the play-in? What do you have, like a number you've kind of honed in on, or how many games they need to win down the stretch here? Because we're really getting into crunch time.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle at this point. I mean, like you said, they're 2 games back of Brooklyn to get out of the play-in. Really 3 games because Brooklyn has the head-to-head tiebreaker. So there's that.
Well, isn't there a tiebreaker with the division? Yeah.
That's if they're tied as head-to-head.
Oh, okay.
That's the second tiebreaker.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And Brooklyn, they only play each other 3 times, and that Brooklyn won 2 of the 3 games, so that's done. But I'm kind of doing it as like, okay, what if Brooklyn goes 500, right?
Right. Because that's the thing. We thought Brooklyn was going to maybe fall off a cliff when they traded those 2 guys. They've been fine.
Yeah, they've been okay, and they played better lately. I think they play Charlotte on Tuesday, which a game they should win, right? Like so.
Yeah.
That they could increase that lead by the time you listen to this podcast. But let's say they go 9-9 over their final 18, which I think is pretty realistic, give or take a game or 2, right?
Yep.
The Heat at that point would have to go 11-5 over their final 16 games to pass Brooklyn. It's possible.
Yeah.
But it's going to be tough.
They've not had a lot of 11-5 stretches this year.
No, especially with they don't have the hardest schedule, right? I'm looking to see now.
It's been up pretty high up there. I haven't looked at Tankathon in a little while, but
yeah, it's
been pretty high on the list for a little while. Although it's actually come down. Now they're middle of the pack. 17th hardest schedule the rest of the way. Yeah,
they don't have a super tough schedule, but
Brooklyn's actually slightly harder.
They do have a lot of road games coming up. After these 2, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of their last 4. After these 2 against Cleveland to end this homestand, they have 8 of their last 14 on the road. And yeah, some of those are, they should win, right? I think 2 games at Detroit. But there are tough games there. They still have to play Dallas. They still have to play Cleveland twice. They still have to play Memphis. Orlando is an easy. They do have
a Brooklyn game, which will be a big one. As you said, they can't get the tiebreaker back, but obviously that's a 2-game swing if you win that, obviously.
Sure, yeah. The tiebreaker, Brooklyn already clinched it, but yes, they do have one more game left against the Nets, which will be huge. But the fact is, like, the Heat have to really go on a big run here just to get out of the play-in. They have any hopes at it, right? You have to at least aim for 12 wins, probably in these 11 wins in these final 16 to have a chance, and that's hoping Brooklyn goes 9-9, which again they could. But if they do any better than that, then it's going to be you have to be even better than 11-5. So the likelihood is right now, I would say, is that the Heat do play in the play-in, right? Which is something we've been talking about all year. Will that happen? Will they avoid it? It seems like they're on that track right now, which obviously is not
ideal.
Not ideal. They not only have to win a game or two to get out of there, but then they're either probably going to face either Boston or Milwaukee in the first round, which that's rough. So
yeah, I mean, I know they're not going to be thinking this way, but like if they get to the playoff, like let's say they get the 6th seed and Philly comes up as the opponent. I know Philly's much better than the Heat this year, but that those guys have to feel really good if that matchup comes up, just because of the recent history there.
There's a big difference there, right?
And it's a big difference between Boston and Milwaukee. Like you said, all year long, they've kind of been, 1A, 1B, and then Philly a clear, 2, essentially.
Yeah. I would definitely still pick Philly in that series, but would I be surprised if it goes 6 or 7 games with the Heat? Probably not, right? Because we've seen Miami match up well against Philly. We've seen them give James Harden and Joel Embiid issues. Jimmy Butler loves facing Philly, right? Like he always gets up for those games after their history together. And it's a big difference in facing Boston, Milwaukee, where honestly, like, is anybody going to predict those series to go past 5 games if the Heat face Boston, Milwaukee with those teams having home court? Probably not. So this, like championship wise, like the Heat are unlikely to win a championship this year, right? I don't think anybody would argue that. But as far as like getting out of the first round and trying to make some type of run in the playoffs, getting out of the play-in is huge. So that's why this next month is so important for Miami, and just trying to make a run to get to that 6th spot.
Yeah. So these 2 games against Cleveland, obviously one which will have happened, those are a big deal because those are 2 of their harder games left on the schedule. Yeah. You get both at home. So by the time you're listening to this, the Heat's outlook might be a little bit different, but as we've tried to make a big point of on this show, we do not like to react to single game results of this Heat team because depending on any given night when we talk, any night when you watch the Heat, you might think very differently about them. It's the nature of them playing. Anthony, you're Mr. Clutch Games.
I don't know.
What's
People
the
are
number
getting
now?
sick of it too. I think 46.
Well, it's funny because it's kind of
46 clutch game of the year. Yeah.
It's been like a running joke in some ways for you on Twitter, like since pretty early in the year.
Yeah. People are tired of it now, though.
But now I think it's the story of the season.
Yeah.
Right. It is, and not necessarily because again they have a pretty good record in those clutch games still.
Yeah.
Like a kind of better than you would, like the math says you finish about 500 in those.
That's why they're better than 500 is because they've won more than they've lost.
So the story of this team is that, like, again, the Heat have a negative point differential. Like, we talk about all these easy games they have left on their schedule. The story with the Heat team is that basically they're like, no matter who they play, the game is the same, and that is not what good teams do, right? Like a team like Boston or Milwaukee, like when they get to play the Bulls, they beat them by 18 points. And it's, it's basically been the story of the Heat season is they can beat anyone on every given night. And I still I think they have confidence in some ways, right? Because of that, because they have Jimmy Butler, because they have Bam, because Tyler Hero can win you a game on any given night, because the 3-point shooting, they believe, I think is still going to tick upward a little bit. But the real problem is like, they're just not good enough, like to pile up those easy wins, right? That's going to be, if this team finishes in the play-in, it's not going to be because they like got killed by the Bucks and the Celtics and the Sixers and the Cavs every time they played them. It's going to be because they have like losses to
the Spurs and Detroit,
and Orlando and like some
the
bad
Bulls
teams
twice,
and that is what the close games tell us more than
Charlotte
like team,
twice.
More than like sometimes teams like get to finish really high in the standings. Wasn't it Phoenix a couple years ago? Like because they're insanely good in those close games. So that's one way the season of your story can be close games. Another way the season of your story can be close games is if you're terrible in those close games and you feel like you were like this close to being, quite a few games better than you were. And that's, again, not the story with this Heat team either. The story with this Heat team is just they've played so many of them because they're a very, very average team that has a relatively high ceiling when you have a guy like Jimmy Butler who come playoff time turns into one of the 10 best players in the world typically, but also a pretty low floor because the bench has been pretty bad and some other factors.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I mean, their offense just hasn't been good enough this year. We've talked about it, to pull away from teams, right? And that's why they're. I mean, when you
they
score,
have lulls, right? You go up by 16 points and they can't keep the foot on the pedal or whatever. They're
on track to make history. I'm
right. They're on pace to have the most clutch games in NBA history at this point, right? Isn't it?
No, the stat is, and I'm looking at it right now. They are on pace to have to be involved in the most games decided by 5 points or less.
Okay, so it's not the clutch games; it's specifically the final score.
Yeah, I think they're on pace to have.
The clutch games probably
last 10 years or something.
Right? That stat hasn't been tracked for very long, but
they already have been involved in 36 games decided by 5 points or less. The record was set by the Nuggets in 1977-78 with 41. So they just need 6 more out of these 16 games to set the record, which is
right now
that is the story of the season,
like 2/3 of the time, basically. So it's the story of the season, and it doesn't explain it doesn't explain why this team is bad, right? Or not bad, mediocre. The reason this team is mediocre is because of all the 3-point shooting, a bunch of things of the offense.
Right.
But it explains so much about this team.
Why they are where they are. Yeah.
They're 22, just the frustrations that people have around this team.
Yeah, they're 22-14 in those games decided by 5 points or less. So, yes, I mean, they've done well, right? And that's why, again, they're not if they hadn't done well in those games, they might be out of the play-in. So, some of that's having Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and having a more experienced group. And some of that, too, is by chance, right? Look at Julius Randle's shot against the Heat last week. Did the Heat deserve to lose that game? Probably not. They probably should have won that game. Julius Randle, that shot after he gets it poked away twice and bounces off his
he's
foot.
Pretty much shooting from the third row.
A fadeaway 3 at the buzzer. The Heat probably should have won that game. They probably should be 3-1 on this homestand. It'd be totally different feel around this team. But that's the risk you have with playing all of these close games. That's going to happen sometimes. Luckily for the Heat, it hasn't happened. As many times as maybe it could have. That's why the Heat have done well in those situations. But that's why I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat go 6-10 over these last 16 games, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go 11-5 because a lot of these games are probably going to be decided in the final minutes.
Yeah. The problem though, obviously, is when teams have those 11-5 stretches like that. Usually, you got some blowout wins in there, and that's how you go on a run. And they just haven't done that. I mean, you look at just their recent schedule, and it's every one of these games is pretty much close. Whether won by 2 on what was that, Monday night? 8-point game on an 8-point blowout right on over the weekend. Lose to the Knicks by 2, beat the Sixers by 2. They had some ugly losses. Lost to the Nets it's a 10-point game. Lost to the Nuggets by 4 a couple last week. Every one of these games, there's only in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 3 games decided by double digits in the last 12 games. It's every one of these games has been close, and most of the games that have been decided by double digits, they've been on the losing end of, which is not a great sign.
I'm just looking right now. I think they've won. Look at this, see if I'm right, but this is crazy. They've only won by more than 5 points once since January 18th.
And it was the Hawks 8-point blowout that we just alluded to.
It's insane. That's almost 2 months that they've had.
They had a 6-point win at the Pelicans. Or sorry, that's a blowout win. A blowout win against the Pelicans. They had
that was it. After that, just once. Yeah.
And then 8-point win against the Hawks, and then it's pretty
Everything
crazy.
Else is by 5 points or less. I mean that is the story of this team. There's
good teams don't deal with that.
No, the Heat last year had a lot of double-digit wins. A lot of easy wins. that team was dominant in the regular season. This just hasn't been the case this year. A lot of that's because of offense. Now we can talk about, like, I don't know if I want to mention it. Maybe the Heat go 5 of 30 against Cleveland on Wednesday from 3. But we've been talking about, like,
what
are they ever gonna, like, do the opposite of regression to the mean and finally, like,
well, it still is regressing to the mean, but it's regressing in the positive direction. Yes, progressing to the mean. That's probably the term that people should use.
Yeah, progressing to the mean. They are now, after their best 3-point shooting performance on Monday against the Hawks, they're now shooting like 40-something% over the last 3 games on threes. 41 of 89, 46.1% on threes in the last 3 games. That's encouraging, right? If all of a sudden this team hits threes again at a 40% clip, maybe maybe the outlook is different. But again, it needs to be. I feel like every time the Heat win, or even if they win 2 in a row, it's like, okay, do it again, because none of this feels sustainable because they haven't really done this all year. They haven't won games like this all year where you're making threes and scoring 130 points to beat the Hawks. Like,
yeah, it was literally their best offensive performance of the season.
Yeah, is that sustainable? I have to say no, because they don't really do that. That's not their identity. So it's hard to so hard to read this team, because we can base it off last year because the same group and say, well, this team has done before, right? Yeah. They should be able to do that, but then this season they haven't. So it's hard to know what's real and what's not real. And that's why this is one of the most confusing seasons that I've ever covered, I think.
Yeah, well, it's confusing because the answers are like so obvious too, right? Yeah. It's not like it's basically like their shooting has fallen off a cliff. Like there's just no fixes, I guess, is what the problem has been. It's been all like the Heat believe in the process that they have, right? And they're going to stick with it. And you can kind of you can understand why, right? To an extent. I know a lot of people wanted them to make some moves more moves in the off season or in the or at the trade deadline, but you can, like, from the Heat's perspective, you can really understand why they have trusted for 50 plus games that this was going to eventually get right. But at the same time, like, there's no pivot on this roster. And obviously with 16 games left, you're not going to pivot too much. Although we can talk about a couple, let's take a quick break and we'll talk about a couple things that have maybe changed in the last couple of games that other than the 3-point shooting could be maybe some positive signs. Okay, let's start with Caleb Martin, because that I think has been kind of the most fascinating player to talk about on this roster all year long. Other than Bam obviously becoming a star, like a legit, offensive star in addition to like a 2-way star that he already was. But Caleb Martin, there was so much talk about who was going to replace PJ Tucker at the 4. Could Caleb Martin do that? Well, as we've said a lot, the starting lineup was really good when Caleb Martin was in there. And then Kevin Love comes here, he goes back to the bench. But now Kevin Love dealing with an injury. We saw a really, really good Caleb Martin performance on Monday night. And the way that he turns defense into offense, we've said a lot of times on the show, for such an offensively deficient team, it's really, really important.
Yeah, and look, like, Caleb Martin has been giving you positive minutes all year. To me, he's the second best player on the team, but as far as like relative to their contract, he's probably the second best value player on the Heat roster, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, at least Bam and Jimmy are hard to kind of argue with, right? And
yeah.
I know
second or third,
a lot of money, but that's obviously
deserved, right? But the point is, like, on a roster full of bad contracts, like Caleb's contract is really
Caleb's a good contract.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference with Caleb right now in this bench role, it's not the position. We've talked a lot about like him being undersized and playing out of position. He's still playing as a power forward in a lot of these bench lineups. Like, it's not like you have Bam, PJ Tucker, and then Caleb Martin, right? It's Caleb Martin, Bam, or Cody Zeller, and then like Jimmy and 2 shooters or 3 shooters around those guys. Caleb is still playing as a 4, quote unquote, in a lot of these lineups. To me, the difference is, in the starting lineup, he had to play as a floor spacer. His role was like so defined. He had to space the floor. for guys like Tyler, Bam, and Jimmy, which is like such a unique combination, right? Like two of your best players don't shoot threes. Tyler is more of like he attacks a lot. Yeah, mid-range guy. Like Gabe Vincent and Kyle Lowry have been in and out of the starting lineup. Like Caleb needed to be that 3-point shooter. In these bench units, he's often playing alongside Strus or Duncan Robinson. Like last night, he was playing a lot with Duncan Robinson. He doesn't have to play that role. He's taking fewer threes, more shots at the rim, is able to show other aspects of his offensive game that we haven't seen it as much this year when he was starting, because that wasn't his role. That wasn't his job on the offensive end. So I think that's why we've kind of seen a freer, better, more active Caleb Martin since he's moved to the bench.
Yeah, he's always been valuable, but now he's, his responsibilities in some way, it's an odd thing, right? Where you go from being a bench player to the starting lineup and your responsibilities kind of decline, right? Like you go from being kind of their number 2 bench guy last year, right? Other than Tyler, he was, I'd say kind of probably their second most important guy off the bench, and a guy who could, was slashing a lot more. And then you go to the starting lineup, and as you said, you become, when you're on the bench, Caleb Martin a lot of times is the second best guy on the court or third best guy, right? They would stagger Jimmy and Bam sometimes. When he goes into the starting lineup, he's pretty clearly the 5th, maybe not the 5th best player, but kind of the 5th most important, because whether it's Gabe Vincent or Kyle Lowry, the point guard just obviously will have the ball in his hands more. So, do you like the move to him to the bench? I know we talked about that when it first happened. Like, we were kind of like unsure about whether they were kind of trying to force something that they didn't need to force. But have you liked that switch ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, I see both sides of it, because at first I was kind of surprised they did it, because that starting lineup had been so good. Yeah, and then Kevin Love's in there, and it's only been whatever. I think Kevin Love played 6 games before he missed the last one with the rib injury, and that starting lineup had been pretty much a negative for the most part, other than a game or two. So that needs to get better, but theoretically, like Kevin Love in that starting lineup makes sense. So over the long run, you would think that'd be a functional lineup. And Caleb Martin off the bench, we've seen the results already. It is not going back to his natural position again, because he is still playing a lot of 4, but his more natural role on offense that allows him to really play to his strengths. I think that is probably the biggest part of that move, and why I've kind of been swayed a little bit and can kind of see why they made it, because it really does kind of unleash Caleb and maximize his skill set, especially on the offensive end. I mean, look, last 3 games maybe, Caleb Martin's been the one closing games. Like, he's not starting games.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that he's not starting.
Kevin Love isn't closing games. It's Caleb. And there's a reason for that. So Caleb is still, we said it too, like even when they made the move, like we said, Caleb is going to play more minutes than Kevin Love. And hasn't even been close. That's going to be the case. That's how true.
He was still played the 5th most minutes last night. Even with Kevin Love out, Strus went in the starting lineup. So like, that's going to be his place, right? He's going to be probably 4th or 5th team minutes most nights, depending. They played Victor Oladipo a lot last night because he was kind of a hot hand.
Played well, yeah.
And actually, last night was, there've not been a lot of games where you look at the final like plus minus numbers and the bench is the reason the team won. And last night was, no one was like crazy in terms of like super, both units. It was a close game kind of throughout, but the bench was really good last night, and particularly Caleb and Oladipo. And they helped them win a game that, they haven't won games like that where maybe the starting, usually the starting lineup has had to be kind of like dominant for them to hang on, right? They would, how many times they built an early lead and had to hang on down the stretch? Like, last night was the opposite. They rallied in the second half, and then obviously Jimmy in closing time helps, but we saw some good stuff from the bench. So we'll see if it's a trade-off, as we've said, but you do see the bench improved because of that move.
Sure, and they had 59 bench points, and I think they entered as the second lowest scoring bench in the NBA.
Yeah.
Caleb is going to help with that, right? Are you always going to expect him to score 50-plus bench points? No. Are you going to expect Victor Oladipo to shoot, what do you do? 4 of 7 on threes?
Yeah, 4 of 7 on threes, yep.
Probably not. But you take it, right, when you can get it. And, last night on Monday against the Hawks, they made threes, and the bench led them to the win, which has not been the case.
That's not been right. That's and again we said it was the most efficient offensive performance of the year for them.
Yeah.
They hadn't hit a 130 I was kind of shocked to see they've only hit 130 like 12 times in franchise history or something. I think.
Really? Wow.
It has not been all, and it feels like teams are hitting that every night now.
Yeah.
Obviously, the
It's the
scoring
Heat.
is exploded, and it's the Heat. And in this
They play
era,
slow.
this new
Yeah.
era where the scoring is way up, they have not. They're definitely a defensive minded team. They hit 131 other time this year, I think, is it? So
Yeah, that was their second highest scoring game of the season.
yeah, they had 132 against the Hornets. Just skimming through the back in November. So yeah, that wasn't the recipe to win, but it was like nice. You know, to be good in the NBA, you've got to have different ways you can win games, right?
Sure.
And you're seeing that move gives them a different dimension. Bam and Jimmy, you wrote about them staggering minutes today. You can check that article out on MiamiHerald.com. What do you think of that? It's not they've done it a little bit, obviously. But Bam sometimes will get that chance. I feel like in the second, Jimmy sometimes comes out, I think, before Bam, if I'm thinking of the rotations.
Yeah. Well, they've gone back and forth, and like they've cycled through a bunch of different things, even like separating Bam and Tyler in the rotation, which has kind of been weird, right? Because those two play so well together. Sometimes Bam has anchored the bench unit. Sometimes it's been Tyler. Sometimes it's been Jimmy. But the last two games, the noticeable shift has been Bam and Tyler coming out together first, like within the 5-6 minute mark, and Jimmy staying in there for most of the first quarter with the bench unit, and like basically being substituted out like with 1 minute left in the first quarter, and that's really like those non-Bam and Jimmy minutes, which everyone complains about, I know, that have been really bad this year.
Yeah,
they've basically been eliminated these last two games.
Yeah, like they played maybe a minute at the end of the first quarter.
Yeah, that's it.
At the end of the third quarter, that's basically it.
The second half of the last two games, either Bam or Jimmy were on the court at all times. And then last night, it was just 26 seconds that you didn't have either Bam or Jimmy on the court. So that's interesting. I mean, will Spoelstra always be able to do that? They're probably not. Like against the Knicks, they needed to kind of match Bam's minutes against with Julius Randle, and that kind of changed the way they they played their rotation a little bit. But I think this makes sense, right? Like like the thing is, here's the challenge, right? Like you want to have either Bam or Jimmy on the court as much as possible, but the minutes with Bam and Jimmy both on the court have been great.
Right.
So you want to maximize that too, but by staggering those minutes, you reduce the time they can play together, which is like the needle that he has to thread. And I think he's done it pretty well. Again, these last two games where I think they still have played like 22 minutes a game in these last two together. It's a little lower. Like I think it was like 25, 26 before when they weren't staggering as much. It was like 4 minutes less. But I think the trade-off is good because those minutes when they have like those 3-4 minute stretches even.
They've been like disastrous.
They've been terrible.
They've been like a 2-point lead turns into an 8-point deficit in the last minute of the first quarter or whatever.
The first two games of the homestand, the two losses to Philly and New York, they were outscored by 17 points in 22 minutes without them on the court. Yeah, like you just can't afford that. So they've made a little adjustment. We'll see if it sticks. But it has been interesting to kind of see that how he's kind of navigated the rotation, and he's really like tried to. Again, like he's tried to like different things all season, but it seems like this might stick. Not just because they've won 2 games, but just because it makes sense. And another aspect of it is you keep Bam and Tyler together. Like all of Bam's minutes these last 2 games have come with Tyler Hero, and that makes a ton of sense because they play so well together. So it just fits to me.
Yeah, and Jimmy can be that specific split that you talk about, the Bam Tyler kind of as one blob, and then Jimmy is his own thing, like because Jimmy is kind of a one-man offense when he needs to be. Sure. So it especially
if you put shooters around him, you put like
exactly
a couple shooters on him, like that's gonna work.
So they kind of have 2 identities they can work with, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I assume they'll stick with it for a little bit here at least. So hopefully this won't be they won't have totally given up on it on Wednesday night, but it makes a lot of sense. And again, it's another reason why I think this team still probably believes they can be tougher in the playoffs than they are in the regular season because you play Jimmy and Bam more minutes in the playoffs, and like you said, they've been really good in those minutes they play together. Should we close out with some quick UD talk?
I always love some UD talk. Sure.
Yeah. All right. What are you most excited about for this 4-day UD celebration at the end of the year?
I think the coolest thing is that they're dedicating the section 305 in the arena to him. I don't know what it's gonna look like, but like the way it was described to us, it's like it just so happens that section 305 is against, I guess a wall, I guess, or maybe it's like close to section 400, which kind of is to the side of it, so they have that extra wall in that section, and it's gonna be like pictures of UD and just stuff dedicated to him, and it's gonna stay there forever. So I think that's a really cool tribute to him. But you know, that's not like those 4 days are gonna be big, but the last regular season home game too. I mean, I don't think he's expected to address the crowd during these 4 days. I think that's going to come the last home game on April 9th against the Magic. Right. At least that's the expectation, probably. And then whenever they retire his number, obviously it's going to be a big deal. So these 4 days are kind of just like the start of the celebration for Giannis's career.
Yeah, that last game, and it's cool. It's like an afternoon, Sunday afternoon game. Like it's like kind of a perfect.
All like, Florida teams against the Magic.
Right, like it's like perfect. It would have, it would have been cool no matter what. But if it was like a Tuesday night game or whatever, like, and they happen to finish the season on the road, like, I don't think it would be the same level of like, it's going to be an event, right? It's really going to be an event down here in South Florida. That last game, hopefully the Heat are in position where it's not like a must win.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think UD will play in that game no matter what, right? Even if it is a must win. Even if it's just a couple minutes, but like, wouldn't it be nice to like see him be able to play like 25 minutes in his last game?
Yeah, I always think back, and this is different, obviously, but like when Dwayne Wade's final game, they weren't going to make the playoffs. Like that was the last game of the year. It was in Brooklyn. Like Dwayne basically played almost the entire game, got a triple double. Like that was so fun. Like Udonis got in there for most of the game too, and like they did their like pick and roll a bunch of times, and that was like obviously you wanted the team to make the playoffs, but that was cool that it gave them a chance to really just like go all out and not have to care about the results. So you would hope that by that game the Heat are kind of in position, and it doesn't mean, like the difference between the play-in and not.
That's the problem. Is that it's like 6-7 or if 6-7 if there's no play-in, do they really care? Yeah. But now they kind of have to care if they're tied with Brooklyn going into the last day of the season. For the
it could be a really important game. So I mean, UD is still going to get honored no matter what.
And I'm sure he's going to play no matter what, right? I'm sure he'll play a couple of minutes.
Right. But it might determine how much he plays, right? How important that game is.
But they let him chase a double-double or something? I don't know about a triple-double for UD, but
that'd be a story.
Maybe like a 12 and 10 for UD.
I think he'd be the oldest player in NBA history to get a triple-double at that point, right?
I have to assume so.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I don't know. I know UD, like, he's kind of a lot of flack for like staying around so long, but he's awesome. Like, I love UD. Like the way he kind of represents Miami and always has represented Miami, and just everything he does for the community. It's just really cool to see. And he's someone that's gonna be around forever. Like he's gonna be around this organization forever.
Yeah, like he's not moving. I know he wants to go no disrespect to Dwayne Wade for deciding to move out of Miami, but like he was not from Miami. Like UD, where is UD gonna go? He's not gonna move to LA in retirement or something. Like
no.
He's staying put in Broward County, where he is now. It's not a real Miamian anymore.
Yeah. Don't tell him that. But yes, that's true. But yeah, like whether it's part owner, like he wants to be, or just working for the team, or just around the team, like he's always going to be around.
Yeah, and the Heat have always been very good about letting alumni keep giving alumni roles within the organization. Like even Juwan Howard, obviously, even Shane Battier was
right.
Like it's not like
Chris Quinn.
It's like a Heat legend.
Anthony Carter. Yeah. He's like, this is the end of his playing career, but this is not the end of his like relationship with the Heat. That's going to be for a long time.
When do I assume? Will they just retire the jersey next year? So like we really get to push the UD celebration into next season too.
Yeah, I'm assuming. I think Dwayne was the following year.
I
don't see why they'd wait for Udonis, as if they already know. I think even Chris Bosh was like pretty soon after.
He officially retired because it took him a long time to officially retire, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Like, it took a little bit longer because
that was he like had to kind of bury the hatchet with the Heat a little bit too, and that happened. It was like I remember he had a whole like he write a book or something, or put out a podcast, or like there was a whole bunch of things happened at one time, and the Bosch retirement came in there too.
Yeah, and it happened fast. Like once that happened, like they retired his number like months later. So I would assume Udonis will get that, be honored in that way next season at some point.
Yeah. So really, we get a UD celebration coming up here in the next month, basically. Yeah, the retirement will be actually the day this goes up, exactly a month away, will be his last regular season game. So, but obviously they're going to play some playoff games too, and at least some at home, unless they totally collapse here. So, not expecting to play in those playoff games necessarily, but it won't be the end of UD.
No,
that celebration will keep going into the playoffs and into next season. So I think that's a good place to leave it. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. Got these last 2 home games and then heading up to Orlando. Are you taking a flight, driving? What are you doing to get up there?
I'm not doing that Orlando.
Oh, you're not doing it.
Yeah. We're skipping it, but I will be covering it from home. Yeah.
Gotcha. So. Oh, right. Because then they come right back home. So
yeah.
A really big stretch here. 4 home games out of the next 5. Got to get some wins. So you can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. Mostly on Panthers. They're in the middle of a playoff hunt as well. Stressful time around South Florida sports, except for the Miami Hurricanes, I guess. Although obviously March Madness will always get stressful. So I'm pretty pumped for this week of college basketball and into next week. I think Miami being good, my Maryland biases, them being pretty good. I finally kind of gotten disenchanted with college basketball for a couple of years, but I'm back in. It's been a fun season there too. So some good basketball. Yeah, I think that's about it.
I'm excited to see what the Hurricanes can do. This is one of the better teams in program history.
Yeah, it's right there, I think, with the Shane Larkin team that is probably
Reggie Jackson
standard of the current era. So all right. Anthony, thanks for doing this. We will talk to you guys next week.